Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Reagan, in your testimony, you discussed the conflict between the South Dakota Department of Game, Fish, and Parks and the Park Service management at Wind Cave National Park. And I'm curious about this because of the fact that it has to do with a U.S. or a South Dakota Fish and Wildlife Agency. The GF&P would prefer to use hunters to manage the elk population in this particular national park. However, the Park Service has found that this proposal to hunt them was unacceptable due to statutory prohibitions against hunting in the park. Further, when the park informed Game Fish and Parks that they would, and this is the Park Service, that they would cull the elk, which in South Dakota terms means that they would shoot them and let them lay. Only after significant disagreement from the Game Fish and Park did the park agree to consider allowing the culled elk protein to be distributed to needy South Dakota families. But that decision has not been made yet. In fact, they have not been able to come to an agreement yet with the Park Service. I suspect that this is part of the reason why the state Game, Fish, and Parks departments get frustrated sometime with their federal partners who sometimes don't seem to be partnering with them in anything that is considered close to being a local concern. While modifying the park's authorizing legislation to allow hunting as a management tool would solve the problem in Wind Cave National Park, it is not a comprehensive solution to statewide wildlife management, nor is it a solution to the tension between state and national park service or Fish and Wildlife Service officials. State officials know how to best manage wildlife in our state, and they should be the chief decision makers when deciding how best to conserve our wildlife. The debate over how to manage elk or an elk population has now spanned several years, in this particular case with no solution to the overpopulation of elk. South Dakota GF&P reached out to the Park Service in late 2015 to set up a meeting, but the Park Service has yet to confirm a date to continue this conversation. How do these types of long-standing disagreements between state and federal officials over wildlife management impact the overall health of the wildlife population that we all propose to want to protect?
Well, that's a big question, Senator. I think I'll start by saying that when I first began my career with the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department about 30 years ago, the state of Vermont Fish and Wildlife Agency was having a terrible time working with the U.S. Forest Service on the Green Mountain National Forest. And the agency heads in that situation almost came to blows over whether or not certain kinds of trees should be cut on the forest for timber or potentially to the detriment of the white-tailed deer resource in the state of Vermont. And so these kinds of issues emerge. I think, you know, I think at the end of the day, what's really required is a major commitment to think about science, to think about partnerships, to think about working through issues. Unfortunately, with turnover in agencies, the bureaucracies of managing issues, and then not to mention the overlay of the judicial system and how sometimes professional management is taken away from the professional managers.
I'm just curious, do you see anything that a change in law or a change in statute or a directive in terms of the regulatory processes, anything that could be done to basically reach or to help reach a long-term solution to reinforce the state's officials' ability to control and manage the wildlife populations in their own states?
Yes, Senator, and of course I pointed out a couple of those in my oral testimony. There's more detail in the written narrative, but the whole notion of revisiting and making sure the savings clauses are contemporary and adequate for the future when thinking about state management authority. In my written testimony, you'll note that sometimes these saving clauses find their way at the end of legislation as opposed to being on the front end, and it's our opinion when that occurs, the courts may not give them the kind of deference that they should in thinking through decisions. And then we also suggest another remedy concerning close collaboration or coordination with the states.
With the chair's indulgence, I have one more very quick question. Are you aware of any other cases where U.S. Fish and Wildlife or Park Service officials have recommended the culling or killing of a game animal and then simply suggesting that they be allowed to rot where they're shot?
Off the top of my head, no.
Thank you.